Namaskar. In this lecture, we will discuss outline of the Transfer of Property Act 1882. We will discuss the following points. Number one, importance and meaning of the property, objectives of the Transfer of Property Act, importance to know the nature of property, Transfer of Property Act not an exhaustive act, then chapters of the Transfer of Property Act, meaning of immovable property, specific transfers in the Transfer of Property Act, and concluding remarks. So we will start with the first topic, that is importance of property. John Locke said that right to property is man's supreme natural right and limitation upon the state. Property is the measure of a person's success. Property is the condition of good life and extension of human personality. Every person has a right to preserve and protect his property. Property is a source of power. Property is a source of labor. Property is the best and safest form of investment. And money and land are the root cause of disputes. So from this PPT, what is the importance of property? Property मनुष्य का सर्वोच्च प्राकृतिक अधिकार है और राज्य के ऊपर प्रतिबंध है। संपत्ति व्यक्ति की सफलता का पैमाना है। संपत्ति अच्छे जीवन की शर्त और संपत्ति व्यक्तित्व का विस्तार है। From all these points, we can conclude that property is very important part of our life, and without property we cannot enjoy our natural life. Then what is the meaning of property? The word property in its most comprehensive sense includes all legal rights of a person except his personal rights, which constitute his status or personal condition. Property, we can say that it is a particular person's right on particular thing which is not his personal right. किसी विशेष व्यक्ति द्वारा विशेष वस्तु पर जो उसका अधिकार है, जो उसका व्यक्तिगत अधिकार नहीं है, उसे हम प्रॉपर्टी कह सकते हैं. Property is what a man has in law. Law and property are bound together. Take away the law and property will be no more. कानून हट जाएगा तो संपत्ति नहीं रहेगी. संपत्ति कानून के बिना नहीं रह सकती. So we can say that property cannot be defined from all aspects, but we can say that property is what a man has in law. So now in this act, the name of the act is Transfer of Property. So property is a bundle of rights. So property rights have been described as a bundle of sticks, which each stick represents a different property right. So what a stick or right does a property owner have? So we can say the following rights a owner can possess: the right of possession, the right of control, the right of exclusion, the right to drive income. So when there is a transfer and entire bundle of rights is transferred, then it is absolute transfer. But where there is a transfer of some of such rights, then it is partial transfer. So we will discuss in next slides, where we highlight these terms. Absolute transfer is that transfer where whole bundle of rights or interest is transferred, or where ownership is transferred. For example, in sale and gift. But if whole of bundle of rights is not transferred, but some rights are transferred, for example, in mortgage and lease, where ownership is not transferred, but limited interests are transferred, that is called partial transfers. Then after knowing the property and importance of property, we are focusing on the objectives of the Transfer of Property Act. So from here we can know the objectives of the act. We can know the objectives from the preamble. The preamble says that this act defines and amends certain parts of the law relating to transfer of property by act of parties. So here word certain parts is used. Here word consolidate is not used. If we read Indian Evidence Act and Code of Criminal Procedure, then their word consolidate is used. So here certain parts means that this act is not covering all type of transfers. So it means there are certain transfer which are not within the scope of Transfer of Property Act. For example, transfer by operation of laws. So what type of transfers which are covered within the Transfer of Property Act? Those transfer which are between living persons. So living person term used inter vivos. जो जीवित व्यक्तियों के बीच में प्रॉपर्टी ट्रांसफर हो रही है, उस तरह की ट्रांसफर्स के ऊपर ट्रांसफर ऑफ प्रॉपर्टी एक्ट एप्लीकेबल होता है. So from this PPT we are getting clarity that consolidate word is not used. So Transfer of Property Act covering or applicable only on those transfers which are between the living persons. So when we are reading the Transfer of Property Act, then this point to be kept in mind that TPA is applicable only on those transfers which are between the living persons. And if there is a transfer which is due to the operation of law, then that is not covered within the Transfer of Property Act. Then whether Transfer of Property Act is an exhaustive law. So when we go through the preamble, then there are word used certain parts of the law. Consolidate word is not used. So first point, that from the certain parts, it is clear that this law is not consolidate law or it is not a complete law. ये एक्ट जो है वो कुछ हिस्सों को प्रभाषित और संशोधित कर रहा है. This act is applicable only on those transfer which is by the act of parties and not those transfer which by operation of laws. Then there are certain other example which we can highlight that this act is not a complete law. For example, section 2 last para says that certain rules of this act not applicable when there is a transfers in Muslim laws. Or section 129 says that the provision related to gifts not applicable on hiba. Then Transfer of Property Act has no application to the creation of easements. There is a separate law which deals with the easements, that is Easement Act 1882. Then special law can override this act. This act means Transfer of Property Act, Marida Chemicals versus Union of India. Supreme Court also held that special law can override the Transfer of Property Act. So we can say Transfer of Property Act is not applicable on all type of transfers, and there are various limitations on this act. Now, very important point is why it is important to know the nature of property. To know the property is important because only then we can apply the correct laws. We can divide properties into two types, movable property and immovable property. If property is movable, then different law applicable. For example, Sale of Goods Act will applicable, Limitation Act, different period of limitation prescribed for movable property and different period is prescribed for immovable property. Law of registration says that transfers of immovable property required to be registered, but transfer of movable property is not required to be registered. Similarly, in Transfer of Property Act, we will see in section 9, property can be transferred orally where it is not specifically required in writing. So if we know the nature of property, then we can apply the correct laws. Next, now we are coming on the what are the various chapters of the Transfer of Property Act. So first there is a preamble and 8 chapters and there is a 1 schedule. तो ट्रांसफर ऑफ प्रॉपर्टी एक्ट जो है वो 8 चैप्टर्स में डिवाइडेड है. फर्स्ट चैप्टर डील्स विद प्रिलिमिनरी फ्रॉम सेक्शन 1 to 4. सेकंड चैप्टर डील्स विद ट्रांसफर ऑफ मूवेबल एंड इमूवेबल प्रॉपर्टी as well transfer of movable property. So here second chapter requires some more discussion because this chapter is divided into 2 parts, A and B. In part A of chapter 2, section 5 to 37 are those sections which applicable on both type of properties. So it is very, very important to note that Transfer of Property Act is not applicable only on immovable property, but applicable on movable as well as immovable properties also. So we can say that though Transfer of Property Act predominantly applicable on immovable property, but there are certain provisions which applicable on both movable as well as immovable properties. For example, section 5 to 37. Then we will discuss in next PPT also. Gift covers both type of properties. So now coming on the outline of this slide, chapter 1 deals with preliminary, section 1 to 4. Then chapter 2 from section 5 to 53, where part A applicable on both movable and immovable properties. Part B deals only immovable property. Chapter 3 deals with sale of immovable property. Chapter 4 deals with mortgage. Chapter 5 with lease. Chapter 6 with exchange. Chapter 7 deals with gift. Chapter 7 deals with transfer of actionable claim. And there is a schedule. So Transfer of Property Act is divided into 8 chapters and there is a 1 schedule. Now coming to the main definition, which is immovable property, though there are various terms also interpreted or defined in section 3, but we are just covering immovable property because Transfer of Property Act predominantly applicable on immovable property. So when we read section 3 of TPA, there is a negative definition which says that immovable property does not include standing timber, growing crops and grass. Then question arises, what does it include? So we can take help from these 3 statutes or these 3 laws, and when we combine these 3 laws, then we can get the meaning of movable property. These 3, section 3 of TPA, section 3 clause 26 of General Clauses Act, section 2 clause 6 of Registration Act 1908. So from these statutes we can come to know that immovable property include land, benefits to arise out of land, things attached to the earth. So अचल संपत्ति में 3 चीजों को इंक्लूड किया गया है, जमीन और जमीन से उत्पन्न होने वाले लाभ और जमीन से जुड़ी हुई चीजें. तो immovable property includes land, benefits to arise out of land, and things attached to the earth. Now, in this slide, we are again repeating some points and adding three things with the things attached to the earth. So, immovable property include three things: land, benefits to arise out of land, things attached to earth. Things attached to earth, again explained in section 3. And three things included within the things attached to the earth. Number one, things rooted in the earth, जो जड़ों के साथ, जमीन के साथ जुड़े होते हैं. तो we know that these are the trees. Then things abandoned in the earth. Then things attached but is so abandoned in the earth. जैसे हम किसी बिल्डिंग को कंस्ट्रक्ट करते हैं तो ये थिंग्स अबेंडेड इन द अर्थ आ जाएगी. बट जब उस बिल्डिंग के साथ डोर्स, शटर्स, विंडोज अटैच करते हैं तो ये थर्ड पॉइंट आ जाएगा, थिंग्स अटैच बट इज सो अबेंडेड इन द अर्थ, बिकॉज दीज डोर्स और विंडोज आर परमानेंटली attached and beneficially used with the things abandoned in the earth. Then three things excluded from the things rooted in the earth. तो तीन चीजें जो है वो exclude की गई है from the things rooted in the earth: standing timber, growing crops, grass. These are excluded and these are included in the sale of goods act, in the definition of goods. And if there is a transaction related with standing timber, growing crops and grass, then sale of goods act applicable. Now we are coming to the important section of Transfer of Property Act, that is transfer of property definition. So section 5 says that transfer of property means creation of a new title or interest is known as transfer of property. So transfer of property, we can know that there are transfer and property. So there is a transfer between two persons. So we know that from the preamble that two persons must be living parties. So then there is a transfer. So transfer here means transfer of property is an act between two or more living persons, conveys property in present or future to other living person or persons or to himself. So here two or more living persons can transfer property to each other, or person can also transfer property to himself if he is in different capacities. For example, when a person is creating a trust, so property can be transferred to himself. Then here word conveys used, it is very, very important term. It means when something is created in favor of other parties. So whether that transaction passes on certain new rights or interest to transferee or not. This is very, very important. If we want to know whether there is a transfer of property, then we can apply this formula, that whether there is a creation of new rights or interest in favor of the transferee. If yes, then it is a transfer of property. For example, in sale, ownership is transferred. In gift, ownership is transferred. In mortgage, interest is transferred. In lease, beneficial enjoyment is transferred. So this section help us to know the meaning of transfer of property. So लिविंग पर्सन्स के बीच में जो प्रॉपर्टी ट्रांसफर हो रही है वो सेक्शन 5 में जो है वो ट्रांसफर ऑफ प्रॉपर्टी मानी जाएगी, लेकिन लिविंग पर्सन जो है उसमें कंपनी और एसोसिएशन of persons or body of individual are also covered, whether those are incorporated or not. So section 5 help us to know the meaning of transfer of property. So there are some transactions that is not transfer of property. For example, partition, family settlement, where nothing new is created in favor of the transferee. So after knowing the transfer of property definition, then we can discuss that what are the essential conditions for a valid transfer. So for a valid transfer of property. Number one, property must be transferable. Section 6 of TPA deals with this type of situation, that but property is not transferable. So there are certain property in section 6 which is not transferable. Then transferor must be competent to transfer. Section 7 says that the person who is transferring the property must be competent. So here we can also connect section 11 and 12 of the Indian Contract Act. Then transfer must be made for lawful consideration and object. If consideration and object is unlawful, then that is not a valid transfer. Then transferee must not be declared disqualified by the law. So here means transferee also competent, not disqualified. We can also refer here section 136 of the Transfer of Property Act, where the officers of court are not competent to take the actionable claims. Then legal formalities, very, very important. So we know if transfer of property, if law requires that there must be registration, attestation, then those must be completed. So if legal formalities are not completed, then that is not a valid transfer. Then if these conditions are fulfilled, then we can say that there is a valid transfer of property. So in transfer of property, these are the specific transfers. Specific transfers are given from chapter 3 to chapter 8. Chapter 3 deals with sale, 4 mortgage, 5 lease, 6 exchange, 7 with gift, and 8 with transfer of actionable claims. So again in this slide we are again elaborating these. Sales in chapter 3 from section 54 to 57. Mortgage in chapter 4 from section 58 to 104. Leases from section 105 to 117 in chapter 5. Then exchange in chapter 7 from section 118 to 121. Then gift from section 122 to 129. Now in this slide we are highlighting what is the difference between these transactions. So in sale there is a transfer of ownership. In mortgage there is not a transfer of ownership, but there is a transfer of an interest in specific immovable property as a security for payment of loan. In lease also there is not transfer of ownership, but transfer of beneficial enjoyment. In exchange there is a transfer of ownership for some other property. And in gift there is a transfer of ownership but without consideration. So in sale and gift, ownership is transferred. These are complete transfers. But in sale there is a consideration required, but in gift consideration is not required. So document which is created in the sale is called sale deed. In mortgage, mortgage deed. In lease it is called lease deed. In exchange, exchange deed. And in gift it is a gift deed. So we can also differentiate attestation wise. In mortgage and gift, attestation is required. Then forms and formalities, there are also certain differences given in section 54 regarding sale. In mortgage 59 section, in lease 107, in exchange 118, and in gift 123. So we can say that these are the specific transfers in the Transfer of Property Act, but these are different from the whether they are partial transfers or absolute. Then attestation wise, then forms and formalities wise. So these are the specific transfers. And after these 5 specific transfers, last chapter deals with transfer of actionable claims. So these are section 130 to 137, which deals with transfer of actionable claims. And term actionable claim is defined in section 6, section 3, para 6. So actionable claim means a claim or a debt for which one can take an action. So one can approach the court for the enforcement of such a claim. But in this actionable claim, that must be unsecured. If it is secured, then that can be recovered from the security. But here, actionable claim or those claim or debt for which one can approach the court, and if actionable claim is transferred by one party to other, then writing is required. So last chapter of TPA deals with transfer of actionable claims. We can also highlight example of unpaid meher or dower in case of Muslims, where if wives remain unpaid regarding his meher, then she can file actionable claim, or what is the name of the suit which she will file regarding the recovery of his meher is actionable claim. Then last we can conclude from these all discussion that Transfer of Property Act is not exhaustive. ये संपूर्ण अधिनियम नहीं है, because it is not covering all type of transfers. It is applicable only on those transfers which are between the living persons, which we are using the term inter vivos. But living person is a broader term than natural person, because living person includes association of persons, group of persons, whether registered or corporated or not. Then TPA is a secular law subject to certain exception. Last para of section 2 and section 129, which say that certain transfers or rules of TPA not applicable if there is a transfer between the Muslims. Then section 4 of TPA says that we have to go through the Indian Contract Act and Registration Act also. So if a term used in TPA and not defined, and that term is defined in Indian Contract Act, then we can refer the Indian Contract Act. For example, consideration is used in TPA, but it is not defined. So we can take the meaning of consideration under section 2 clause D. Similarly, wherever registration is required, then we can refer the Registration Act for the process of registration. Transfer of Property Act predominantly deals with immovable property, but we can't say that it is totally applicable on immovable property. As we discussed in the starting, that Transfer of Property Act is also applicable on movable as well as immovable property. For example, section 5 to 37 applicable on both type of property. Gift, covering both movable and immovable properties. Then Transfer of Property Act, not titled as Transfer of Immovable Property Act. ट्रांसफर ऑफ प्रॉपर्टी एक्ट का नाम ट्रांसफर ऑफ इमूवेबल प्रॉपर्टी एक्ट नहीं है, क्योंकि ये मूवेबल और इमूवेबल दोनों को कवर कर रहा है। हालांकि प्रीडोमिनेटली टीपीए जो है वो इमूवेबल प्रॉपर्टी के ऊपर एप्लीकेबल होता है। सिमिलरली ट्रांसफर ऑफ प्रॉपर्टी एक्ट का नाम जो है वो सेल ऑफ इमूवेबल प्रॉपर्टी एक्ट नहीं है, जिस तरह सेल ऑफ गुड्स एक्ट का नाम है, क्योंकि ट्रांसफर ऑफ प्रॉपर्टी एक्ट deals with all aspects of immovable property, not only one sale. It deals mortgage, lease. Then Section 5 says that property must be in existence. जिस भी प्रॉपर्टी की ट्रांसफर हो रही है वो एग्जिस्टेंस में होनी चाहिए. द प्रॉपर्टी विच इज नॉट इन एग्जिस्टेंस इज नॉट द सब्जेक्ट मैटर ऑफ ट्रांसफर ऑफ प्रॉपर्टी एक्ट. And last, we can say that TPA can be studied in two parts. First, from section 1 to 53A, which deals various rules of transfer applicable, and part B from section 54 to 137, which deals with specific transfers. So with these we conclude. Thanks.